It all started on an ordinary day at a small, bustling café where people were wrapped up in their routines, sipping coffee, scrolling on their phones, and exchanging casual greetings. Among them, a little girl walked in, holding something tight in her tiny hands. At first glance, she seemed just like any other child, a few years old, with her hair slightly messy from the morning and a worn-out backpack hanging loosely from her shoulders. But there was something different about the way she moved, something in her posture that caught the attention of anyone who happened to glance her way. She wasn't skipping or playing. She wasn't laughing or looking around in curiosity like most children her age. She walked with a purpose, a quiet determination that contrasted sharply with the casual energy of the cafe around her. In her hand, she clutched a small piece of paper and, more importantly, a folded $5 bill. The $5 might not sound like much to anyone older, anyone used to handling money and transactions daily. But in the hands of this little girl, it carried weight far beyond its numerical value. It was not just money. It was hope, a token of her willingness to give what she had, however small, to make a difference. Each step she took seemed deliberate, almost careful, as though she understood that this moment mattered far more than she herself fully realized. People in the cafe noticed her, some offering a polite smile, others glancing briefly before returning to their routines, unaware that what was about to happen was going to stop even the most hardened hearts in their tracks. At one corner of the cafe sat a man in uniform, a Navy SEAL, known to those who knew him for his strength, discipline, and countless missions that had taken him to dangerous places around the world. On the surface, he appeared calm, sipping his coffee, reading a report, and observing the cafe without really seeing it. But then, this little girl approached him. From a distance, it seemed almost incongruous. A tiny child walking toward a trained soldier, a figure known for composure under pressure, carrying only $5 and a request that no one could have predicted. She stopped just a few feet away, looked up at him with wide, earnest eyes, and in her small voice, which carried more weight than her stature would suggest, she spoke. The way she approached wasn't pushy or demanding. There was no hesitation, no awkwardness, no signs of fear. She walked straight up to him as if she had rehearsed every step, as if she knew exactly what to say and how to say it. Her hand extended the folded bill with an innocence that only a child could possess. She didn't ask for candy. She didn't want a toy. She didn't seek attention or praise. She simply handed over the $5, her eyes locked on his, conveying a message that words alone could not capture. It was a gesture of trust, of belief, and of the understanding that sometimes even the smallest contribution can carry immense significance. The man looked down at the little hand holding the money, then back into the child's face, trying to process the situation. It was not every day that someone came up to him with such clarity of purpose, with such raw honesty. The $5, trivial to most, represented something far more meaningful, a call for help, a bridge between innocence and the reality of a situation that weighed heavily on the girl's mind. People around them continued their routines, oblivious to the quiet tension in the corner. Yet for the Navy SEAL, time seemed to slow. He could feel the weight of the moment, the gravity hidden beneath the child's small frame. She stayed there, quietly, patiently, giving him the chance to respond. There was no rush, no expectation of immediate action, just a small girl and her $5, and the unspoken hope that someone, anyone, would hear her plea. The simplicity of it was almost shocking. In a world full of noise, complexity, and pretense, here was a human connection stripped down to its most basic elements. A person in need, another capable of help, and a tangible token of intention, no matter how modest. It was a pause in life's constant motion, a moment where something very real was happening, even if the rest of the cafe remained unaware. The little girl's approach was so unassuming yet so deliberate that it drew the attention of the Navy SEAL in a way nothing else could. His life had been filled with high-stress situations, with moments requiring split-second decisions under extreme pressure. But here, in front of him, was a challenge of a different sort, a moral, emotional, and human challenge that no training could prepare him for. The $5 in her hand, though small in amount, represented courage, trust, and vulnerability. And in that moment, he realized that the stakes were not about money or danger. They were about human connection, about recognizing a need and responding to it. As the little girl held out her $5, she finally spoke, her voice trembling just slightly, but carrying a clarity and urgency that immediately drew the Navy SEAL's full attention. "Please help my mom," she said. Those 4 words were soft, almost fragile, but they landed like a weighty truth in the middle of the café. For anyone else, it might have sounded like a casual request, a passing comment from a child, but for him, every word seemed to echo. He froze, mid-sip of his coffee, and looked down at her small face, trying to process the meaning behind the plea. Her eyes, wide and unwavering, reflected a seriousness that no child should have to carry, a maturity born from worry and fear. The Navy SEAL had seen danger in its rawest forms, had been trained to respond to high-stakes situations in faraway lands, and had faced people who wanted to harm others. But this was different. This wasn't about missions or strategies or tactical responses. This was personal. This was human. And the gravity of the moment struck him harder than any battlefield could. A little girl was asking for help, not for herself, but for her mother. The simplicity of the request, stripped of exaggeration, stripped of drama, and stripped of anything but need, made it impossible to ignore. Around them, the café seemed to blur into background noise. Conversations faded, the clinking of cups seemed distant, and the bustling movement of people went unnoticed. The Navy SEAL's entire attention focused on her, on the weight in her words, and on the reason she had come here with nothing more than $5 in courage. He noticed the way her fingers gripped the bill, her small knuckles white from the effort of holding onto it tightly, as though letting go too soon might erase the possibility of help entirely. He noticed her eyes, searching, pleading, and yet filled with a quiet dignity, like she understood the gravity of her actions even if she couldn't fully articulate it. She didn't explain much. She didn't give him long details or make a case for why her mom deserved assistance. There was no bargaining, no pleading for sympathy, no exaggeration. She simply said what she needed, and the honesty in her words was striking. It was a direct line from the heart of a child to the conscience of an adult, a call that demanded acknowledgement. The Navy SEAL, someone who had been trained to detect deception, to navigate lies and half-truths in intense situations, felt a rare and profound clarity. He could see that her words were true, that her fear and concern were real, and that she had come as far as she could with what she had to ask for help. The simplicity of her statement was disarming. It was a reminder that sometimes the most profound requests aren't wrapped in elaborate explanations or grand gestures. They are small, clear, and rooted in necessity. A child asking for help for her mother conveyed something that no report, no mission brief, and no military strategy could ever convey: the power of vulnerability and the need for compassion. In that moment, the Navy SEAL realized that he was facing a situation that required not tactics, but humanity. His instincts, honed over years of disciplined training, told him to act decisively. But the first step was simply listening, really listening, to the heart behind those 4 words. Her request also highlighted a truth that often goes unnoticed. Children, in their innocence, can communicate more effectively than adults at times because they lack the filters, the self-consciousness, and the fear of judgment that complicates adult interactions. She didn't hesitate, she didn't downplay her need, and she didn't ask in a way designed to manipulate or impress. She asked because she had to, because her mother needed help, and because she believed that somewhere out there, someone could make a difference. And in doing so, she reminded everyone around her, especially the Navy SEAL, of the real meaning of courage. Courage isn't always about facing danger or performing heroic feats in battle. Sometimes, it's about stepping forward, voicing a need, and trusting that someone will respond. The Navy SEAL's pause was telling. He had seen countless crises, and yet he found himself momentarily unprepared for this encounter. The intensity of her need, the honesty in her voice, and the weight of her trust combined to create a situation that demanded more than a routine response. He couldn't simply nod, smile politely, or offer a generic reassurance. This was a call that required attention, reflection, and, most importantly, action. And even though she was just a little girl with $5, she had managed to place him in a position where he could not remain indifferent. Her words also carried an implicit message that help doesn't always come in the form of vast resources, complicated plans, or grand gestures. Sometimes, the call for help is simple, direct, and honest. And sometimes, it's enough to stop even the strongest person in their tracks, making them realize the responsibility they carry simply by being present, by being willing and able to respond. The simplicity and sincerity of the little girl's words carried a weight that went far beyond what anyone could expect from someone so young. When she said, "Please help my mom," it wasn't just a request. It was a pure expression of love and concern, delivered without hesitation, without any adornment, and without any hidden motive. There was no attempt to dramatize, no appeal to pity, and no clever phrasing to make her request more compelling. It was raw, straightforward, and painfully honest. That kind of honesty is rare, even among adults, because we often hide our needs behind explanations, justifications, or the fear of being judged. But this little girl had none of that. She simply spoke from the heart, and that made her words hit with an unexpected force. What made her sincerity even more striking was the contrast between her age and the gravity of the situation. A child's world is usually filled with games, toys, and imagination. Their problems are simple, their concerns manageable. But here was a young girl facing a reality far beyond her years, confronting challenges that required courage, resourcefulness, and emotional resilience. The sincerity in her voice wasn't just a reflection of innocence. It was a reflection of responsibility. She knew her mother needed help. She knew she had a limited resource to offer, and she came forward with exactly what she had to give. That combination of awareness, care, and honesty created a moment that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. The Navy SEAL, trained to respond to high-pressure situations with precision and control, felt the impact of her sincerity immediately. It wasn't the words themselves that were extraordinary, it was the depth behind them. In a split second, he understood that she had no ulterior motive, no exaggeration, no attempt to manipulate or impress. She was simply communicating a truth that needed to be acknowledged. That kind of unfiltered honesty has a way of piercing through barriers, of demanding attention, and of triggering an emotional response even in those who have faced danger, stress, and trauma beyond what most people could imagine. Her words carried a quiet authority, not because of her tone, but because of the authenticity embedded in them. Sincerity has a unique power. It can transform ordinary moments into something profound, and in this case, it elevated a simple interaction into an event that would linger in memory. People often underestimate how much impact sincere communication can have, particularly in moments of vulnerability. Adults, especially, are accustomed to filtering their expressions, framing their words carefully, and weighing every syllable. Children, on the other hand, often speak in ways that are unguarded and direct, and that unfiltered truth can strike with unexpected intensity. The little girl's sincerity bypassed any formalities, any polite social constructs, and went straight to the heart of the matter. It wasn't just the words that conveyed sincerity. It was her body language, her expression, and the way she held the $5. Every detail reinforced the authenticity of her plea. Her eyes, wide and steady, conveyed earnestness. Her posture, upright yet slightly hesitant, reflected both courage and vulnerability. Her hands, holding the money with care, symbolized the tangible effort she was making to help. It all combined to form a portrait of a child who had internalized the importance of her mission, who understood that even the smallest contribution mattered, and who was willing to risk rejection or indifference in order to do what she could. The moment also highlighted the unspoken language of sincerity. You don't need flowery words or dramatic gestures to communicate truth. Sometimes presence, intent, and authenticity speak louder than any carefully constructed sentence. The Navy SEAL, despite his training and experience, was confronted with a form of communication that he could not ignore or dismiss. The sincerity in her plea required him to pause, to reflect, and to recognize the humanity in the moment. It was a reminder that, even in a world filled with complexity and chaos, the pure, simple truth of someone's need can cut through everything and demand a response. Her sincerity also forced the Navy SEAL to confront a deeper truth about empathy and attention. It's easy to dismiss requests when they come in complicated forms or when they require effort to understand. But sincerity has a way of stripping away excuses and making it impossible to remain detached. The little girl, by simply speaking her truth, was holding up a mirror to the world, showing that the most important part of helping someone isn't about analysis or strategy. It's about recognizing their need and responding with care. Even the smallest gestures can carry immense meaning when paired with sincerity. That $5 bill in her hand was more than money. It was a representation of trust, of honesty, and of the seriousness of her request. And the way she delivered it, without pretense, without embellishment, without expectation, showed that sincerity alone has the power to move people, to capture attention, and to inspire action in ways that elaborate arguments or appeals often cannot. The Navy SEAL's pause was more than just a brief hesitation. It was a moment that revealed the depth of the emotional impact the little girl's words had on him. In his career, he had faced countless life-or-death situations, seen destruction and hardship in its rawest forms, and made split-second decisions that determined the outcome of dangerous missions. Yet none of those moments could have prepared him for the quiet intensity of a child's plea for her mother. He froze not because he didn't know how to act, but because he was confronted with something entirely different, a combination of innocence, courage, and sincerity that struck straight to the core of his humanity. It was a reminder that even the strongest, most disciplined individuals can be stopped in their tracks by the sheer weight of honesty and need. The pause was a reflection of the inner conflict he felt in that instant. On one hand, his training kicked in, assessed the situation, understand the need, determine the best response. On the other hand, there was no protocol, no guide, and no standard procedure for a scenario like this. This was not about missions, rules, or strategy. It was about a human being standing in front of him, vulnerable yet determined, asking for help for someone she loved. That realization created a tension in him, a mixture of awe, concern, and responsibility. He couldn't simply continue his day as though nothing had happened. He couldn't ignore the impact of the child's courage or the sincerity of her words. The very act of pausing became an acknowledgement of the gravity of the moment. His reaction also highlighted the power of unexpected vulnerability. Soldiers are trained to maintain composure under extreme pressure, to respond to threats with precision, and to manage their emotions in the face of danger. But this wasn't danger in the traditional sense. There were no immediate physical threats, no mission objectives, no tactical decisions to make. What he faced was emotional, an intimate, human challenge that required empathy rather than strategy, compassion rather than force. The little girl's words had cut through layers of defense that even he didn't know he had. They bypassed the usual mechanisms that allowed him to remain detached, leaving him momentarily exposed to the raw truth of human need. People often underestimate the influence of simple human interactions, especially ones that seem ordinary at first glance. A child asking for help might appear minor, even trivial, to someone passing by. But when combined with sincerity, urgency, and a real need, such interactions can have a profound effect. The Navy SEAL's pause captured this perfectly. It demonstrated that sometimes the most powerful moments in life are not found in extraordinary circumstances, but in everyday encounters where courage, honesty, and empathy collide. The little girl didn't have weapons, authority, or social influence. She had only words, a small folded bill, and a heart full of concern. Yet that combination was enough to halt a man trained to face the unimaginable. During that frozen moment, he was also confronted with the weight of responsibility. It's one thing to act in a controlled environment where decisions have clear outcomes. It's another to respond to someone's need when failure isn't just a statistic. It carries emotional consequences. The Navy SEAL realized that how he responded in the next few seconds would matter, not just for the child, but for her mother and for the sense of trust the child had placed in him. This kind of responsibility is rarely taught in training. It's something you encounter only in real life, in moments that feel both delicate and urgent. That awareness deepened his pause, making him weigh every possible reaction, every potential word, and every action he could take. The way he froze also illustrated the subtle power of human connection. Even the toughest, most disciplined individuals can be profoundly affected by the honesty and vulnerability of another person. It's a reminder that strength isn't just measured by physical endurance or skill. It's also measured by the ability to feel, to recognize need, and to respond appropriately. The little girl, without knowing it, was testing that strength. She was calling on something deeper than training, something essential, the capacity to act with compassion and integrity. And in that pause, the Navy SEAL wasn't just thinking. He was feeling, processing, and preparing to meet the moment in a way that honored the courage she had shown. His hesitation was not indecision, it was reflection. It was the human reaction to encountering something powerful, something simple, yet profound. It was the realization that life's most meaningful moments often come unannounced, through small acts of honesty and need. And it was proof that sometimes the bravest act isn't charging into battle, but pausing, listening, and truly considering how to help someone who is trusting you with their vulnerability. The lesson about compassion and listening became painfully clear in that moment. Watching the Navy SEAL freeze as the little girl spoke, it was evident that the most important action wasn't force, skill, or even immediate problem solving. It was the simple act of paying attention. Too often, in the rush of daily life, people overlook the significance of listening. We are so preoccupied with our own tasks, schedules, and routines that we miss moments where someone's need is laid right in front of us. The little girl, with her $5 and heartfelt plea, demonstrated something that adults, even trained professionals, often forget. That compassion begins with presence, and presence begins with truly hearing another person. Her courage to speak up was matched by the requirement for someone else to stop, pause, and recognize the importance of her words. Compassion, in its most effective form, is not always about grand gestures. It's rarely about solving every problem at once. Sometimes, it's about acknowledging someone's pain, validating their experience, and giving them the dignity of attention. That is exactly what the Navy SEAL had to confront in that moment. He could have dismissed her, smiled politely, or tried to gently redirect her, but the sincerity and urgency in her voice demanded more. It reminded him, and anyone observing, that listening is not passive. It is active. It requires focus, empathy, and the willingness to be affected by what you hear. In a world where so many voices compete for attention, the ability to stop and listen fully is a rare and powerful gift. The situation also underscored a subtle but critical truth, that compassion and listening are inseparable. Listening without care is empty. Care without listening is misguided. The little girl's request required both. She had already taken a courageous step in approaching the Navy SEAL. Now, for her words to have meaning, she needed him to receive them fully. And in those frozen seconds, he realized that responding appropriately demanded more than a mechanical reaction. It demanded understanding, emotional presence, and the willingness to step into the vulnerability she had offered. That is what true compassion entails, not just hearing, but comprehending and allowing oneself to be moved by another person's experience. This encounter also demonstrated how deeply listening can affect the listener. It wasn't just the little girl who was vulnerable. The Navy SEAL, despite his training and experience, became vulnerable in that moment too. He had to confront emotions that he usually compartmentalized: empathy, concern, and the awareness of responsibility. Listening in this context wasn't neutral, it was transformative. The act of paying attention, of truly listening, had the power to shift his perspective, slow his pace, and remind him of the human stakes behind every action. In a career defined by action, precision, and discipline, this pause to listen became one of the most significant moments he had experienced. Furthermore, the lesson about compassion extended beyond just responding in the moment. It highlighted a broader principle about human connection, that empathy and action are not separate. They are intertwined. When we listen deeply and with care, we naturally become attuned to what actions are needed. We understand the weight of another person's words, and we recognize the responsibility we hold in responding. The little girl's plea was simple, yet it carried immense weight because it invoked not only the need for help, but also the human imperative to care. In that instant, the Navy SEAL's training, experience, and instinct combined with empathy and compassion, creating a powerful, balanced response that could not have been achieved through action alone. Another important aspect of this moment was the clarity it brought about priorities. Listening forces people to focus on what matters most. In a world filled with distractions, noise, and competing demands, it's easy to overlook what is truly urgent. Yet here was a child whose small voice carried the gravity of real need, demanding attention above everything else. The Navy SEAL's pause, induced by the sincerity of her words and the simplicity of her request, emphasized that sometimes the most pressing tasks are not the ones we plan for, but the ones that arrive unexpectedly, wrapped in human vulnerability. Compassion requires not just noticing these moments, but responding with presence and intention. The lesson also illustrated the ripple effect of listening and compassion. When someone is genuinely heard, it validates their experience, gives them hope, and empowers them to continue. The little girl had taken a risk in approaching a stranger, and in the act of listening, the Navy SEAL could honor that courage, reinforcing that her actions mattered. Compassion and attention have this exponential effect. By truly listening and responding, one person's actions can create trust, hope, and motivation in another, often far beyond the immediate interaction. Finally, it became clear that the act of listening is not passive and compassion is not optional. They are choices that require presence, patience, and intention. The little girl's plea demanded that the Navy SEAL make that choice. And in doing so, he was reminded of the enduring power of empathy, that sometimes the right response isn't a dramatic intervention, but a willingness to stop, pay attention, and let the truth of another person's need guide your actions. The final point, the idea that small actions can make a big difference, is perhaps the most powerful lesson from this encounter. The little girl came forward with just $5 in her hand, a sum that in most contexts would seem insignificant. It wouldn't buy a meal for many, it wouldn't solve complex problems, and it certainly wasn't enough to change the course of someone's life by itself. Yet in that moment, it carried extraordinary weight. It wasn't the monetary value that mattered. It was the intention behind it, the courage it represented, and the act of taking initiative. This small gesture set in motion a chain of events that had the potential to create real impact, simply because someone chose to pay attention and respond. It is a powerful reminder that size, scale, or apparent significance is often less important than sincerity, effort, and follow-through. The little girl's $5 symbolized something much larger than money. It represented hope, trust, and the willingness to act in the face of difficulty. Often in life, people feel paralyzed by what they perceive as their own limitations. They believe that their actions are too small to matter, that the challenges they face are too large, and that only grand gestures can have meaning. Yet this moment demonstrates the opposite. Small actions, when motivated by genuine concern and executed with courage, can carry profound consequences. The Navy SEAL's response to her gesture illustrates that impact is often determined not by the size of the contribution, but by the willingness to recognize its importance and act upon it. It is easy to underestimate the significance of small deeds. In daily life, many opportunities to make a difference go unnoticed because they seem too minor too inconsequential, or too inconvenient. A kind word, a listening ear, a small donation, or even a simple gesture of encouragement may feel trivial in the moment. Yet these seemingly insignificant acts can change the trajectory of someone's life. The little girl's $5 was, in essence, a microcosm of this truth. By offering what she had, she created the possibility for transformation, opening the door for someone else to step in and magnify the effect of her effort. The Navy SEAL's reaction also underscores the multiplier effect of small actions. One act of courage, one moment of genuine concern, or one decision to help can inspire further action, setting off a ripple effect that extends far beyond the original interaction. A single gesture, small though it may be, carries the potential to inspire hope, build trust, and motivate others to continue helping. The little girl's contribution was modest in monetary terms, yet it demanded a response from someone capable of much more, turning a small act into a significant moment of human connection. Moreover, this story teaches a broader lesson about responsibility and initiative. Too often, people wait for the right moment or the perfect opportunity to make a difference, believing that their contribution must be monumental to matter. The little girl, however, demonstrated a profound principle. Waiting is not necessary. The action you take, no matter how small, can be meaningful when it comes from the heart. She didn't have the resources of a grown adult or the influence of someone in power. She had $5 and a sense of responsibility for her mother, and she used what she had to try to make a difference. That mindset of using what you can with what you have right now is a lesson that resonates far beyond the story itself. Another important aspect is courage. Small actions often require courage precisely because they seem inadequate or because the stakes feel too large. For a child to walk up to a Navy SEAL and ask for help for her mother required bravery, vulnerability, and trust. The act was small in scale but immense in emotional weight. Courage doesn't always manifest in grand, dramatic ways. It often appears in the willingness to step forward, speak up, or give what little you have when it matters most. Small actions and courage are inseparable because the former often demands the latter. The story also highlights the idea that impact is relational. The $5 alone would not have accomplished anything without the Navy SEAL's willingness to respond. Action, even when small, needs engagement, empathy, and follow-through to create meaningful results. Yet the combination of a small gesture and a receptive response demonstrates how human connection magnifies effect. It shows that every person has the potential to influence someone else's life, even if the initial step seems minor or inconsequential. Finally, the moment captures the timeless lesson that everyone has the capacity to contribute meaningfully, regardless of age, status, or resources. The little girl's action reminds us that the potential to make a difference lies not in what you have, but in what you are willing to do with what you do have. $5, a kind word, or a listening ear may seem small in isolation, but when combined with sincerity, courage, and attention, it becomes powerful enough to create profound change.